Introductions.
This conference will now be recorded.
I'm Pat Malone, Commissioner.
Annabelle Jaramillo, Commissioner.
Zan Ojiro, Commissioner.
Joe Kirby, County Administrator.
Alyssa Rash, Public Information Officer.
Okay, and then we'll go to those that are joining us by GoToMeeting.
This is John Carr, I'm member of the public.
Morning, John.
Hi, Pat. Charlie Fountain, Health Department.
Lilia Neville, Board of Commissioners.
Hey, good morning. It's Kate
Weather-
Porchner, Corral Stanton County Economic Development Office.
Weatherall Juvenile Department.
Erica Milo, Board Recorder.
Teresa Farley, Board of Commissioners staff.
Vance Cronin, County Council.
Okay.
Nancy Wise, Member of the Public.
And I see we have Sarah Hartstein. Good morning, Sarah. And then caller 03. Is that Brian Lee?
No, Commissioner, that very well could be me. I'm running both my computer and a telephone. This is Matt.
Okay. All right. Well, next up, are there any announcements? Hearing none. Next up, comments from the public. Hearing none. Number 3, review and approve the agenda. Are there any additions or corrections?
I have none.
I have none.
That's wonderful. There have been no chair decisions since our last board meeting, so we're on to item 5, work sessions, update from the EOC. I don't see Brian is here yet, and I think Danielle Brown's on vacation, a well-deserved vacation this week, or time off. Okay.
Go to Matt Weatherall on the EOC.
Oh, okay. And caller 04, is that you, Brian?
Yes, probably. It is me.
Okay. Brian, why don't you go ahead and get us started on the EOC update?
Sure. So morning, everyone. So for EOC updates, we sort of wound things down significantly. We did close the fairgrounds, mainly just due to lack of a large volume of evacuees last Friday. We are still offering donated supplies for any evacuees in need, and we're working with some of the hotels to coordinate that. Other than that, we're sort of centralizing and inventorying all of our additional donations, and we're going to work with the group primarily out of Lynn County who's getting stuff up the Santan Canyon to the different communities. They're doing deliveries, and it's pretty well coordinated with Lynn County, so we're hoping to utilize them and get stuff a little more local up that area. And then the state is still working on their centralized warehouse, probably stationed out of Eugene, and any additional donations we'll get there to make sure they're used sort of in our region. Other than that, that's kind of our main focus, is just sort of wrapping up those projects. There's still a long list of after-action items that we're starting to build out. I know Commissioner Ojiro emailed me about one of our local nonprofits that wanted to meet to discuss just kind of future steps and how to improve our processes. So I've built out a long list of people I'm going to start meeting with to discuss what went well and what could be improved upon. And then all this was sort of an opportunity to refine our mass care and sheltering plan as well as our volunteer and donation plan. So I think we have a good pathway forward in terms of dealing with these sort of situations in the future. And obviously, fire condition-wise, we're looking pretty good. Everything's starting to get tamped down. Evacuation orders are starting to be lifted, and people are starting to be able to return to their communities and or assess their damages. So overall, in light of all the circumstances in Oregon, things are starting to look up. nothing to report on my end.
Great, Brian, I appreciate the kind of after event reporting. I was on the Fair Board meeting last night, and in the time I've been a commissioner, the fairgrounds as a resource have been mentioned repeatedly, but they have the space, but a lot of times don't have the specific equipment or supplies that are needed, and I hope this last event will spur us to figure out ahead of time what's needed there and where to get things. I know there's been talk about a generator out there for emergency power, and so looking forward to feedback on how things went on a rapidly developing emergency and pretty rapidly winding down. So,
And I do want to just give kudos to a couple folks. Lynn McKee was amazing to work with. She really helped us mobilize that fairgrounds and made her space available and staff available. And then, of course, Matt Weatherall and Lori Starha also helped just get the EOC teams activated and just be another second mind. I know I was running pretty ragged there during the red flag condition week, and they were just nice to be able to bounce ideas off of and provide a second mind and a second voice. And they helped a lot, and I know they were briefing you guys a lot as well, and that was really, really helpful. So I just really appreciate all their support, and that worked out fantastically.
Great. Well, Annabelle?
Yeah, Brian, one thing I would really like to just kind of have a roster of all our county family that have participated in these emergencies, just to be able to acknowledge them personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And we sort of have a roster, at least of county employees and a lot of volunteers, as well as a loose roster of organizations. I'm going to start compiling some of those. I'm nervous that I'll miss somebody because I'm sure there's organizations that we're helping that I'm not aware of, but we're definitely going to compile some of those just to have some level of acknowledgement to both county staff and volunteers.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else for us, Brian?
Nope, that's it, other than we're shifting gears, and when everyone comes back rested, we'll probably dive back in to help support the DOC with all their projects related to COVID.
Okay. Thank you. That's a good segue into Charlie Fountain.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, I want to really give hats off to Brian, Matt, and Laurie, as well as Sierra, a lot of others for pulling together this other response. It's really hugely stretched resources to have an emergency on top of an emergency. And I think that although it really did stretch county resources, we came out well on the other end of it, and it was an incredibly strong effort by everyone. So on my side, we're still sustaining the COVID response through all of this. Obviously, a number of enhanced COVID concerns with displacement, population movements, the activation of a large-scale EOC, a lot of other response activities that we are, both locally, statewide, particularly a lot of my colleagues around the state who are dealing with displacements and a lot of now unhoused people within their jurisdictions. So thank goodness we don't have to deal with that as well, doing our part to help sustain and support those folks. But from a public health side, we are really aware of and will be very, very closely monitoring over the next few weeks the potential COVID consequences of all of these emergency worker movements, the populations that were displaced, and the disruption of public health communicable disease efforts. Locally, this is obviously an incredibly busy week through the smoke and through the disturbances, getting ready for OSU student return, finalizing plans with OSU. Had an incredibly busy weekend. They are just finishing up move-in today. Pretty small group expected today, but large move-ins on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Latest figures from OSU indicate that they had around 2,000 people come in to be tested, move into residence halls so far. Again, small group today, so just under 2,000 total tests done. We had 27 positives so far out of that. The vast majority, of course, of those were on Friday. 24, on Friday, one a day since then. So 27 total to this point, and that works out to about a 1.4% positivity rate. So Friday gave us a big scare. We'll be looking really closely with OSU on what might have been behind that, whether there were people from specific localities, or whether it was just one of those imponderable statistical anomalies where, occasionally in statistics, numbers are not evenly distributed, and you get inexplicable clusters. But we will be looking into that once the dust settles from this and we have some better information on the exact demographics of both the overall student population and then the subpopulation that tested positive. To date, about 60% of those positive cases have opted to move into OSU isolation housing. About 40% opted to go home. So roughly around 16 people, it looks like, thus far, not including today, that have moved into OSU isolation housing. I want to take my hat off in particular to our CD team. Shar Yeager, who has just recently taken over as the communicable disease program manager and then was pulled away to do wildfire response for a week, has just done an incredibly outstanding job in both responses, way above and beyond, stepped up to an incredible rate, as well as the entire communicable disease team that's been working 7 days a week for months now. Had an incredibly busy weekend this last weekend. At any given point, in addition to the positive cases that come through, they are case managing and contact tracing, on any given day, 60 to 70 people who are contacts that they're checking with daily and doing monitoring on. We also have great assistance still, and more than ever, from OSU administration and their case assistants. So they have staff who are actually doing a lot of that monitoring for OSU students. That's just been a really important and valuable case expander. So I think that's my report. If you have any questions, I'm happy to address those.
Annabelle?
Yeah, Charlie, I want to know what kind of feedback have you gotten from all this? I mean, I really felt like you responded, the health department responded quickly, the university responded quickly to the potential reasoning behind the uptick. But have you gotten any feedback on that from the community at all? I think I felt comfortable with what was being said because I think it looked like we were on top of it. So, any comments?
I appreciate the vote of confidence, Commissioner. It's helpful to hear. Also, look to Lilia to weigh in on this. Yeah, there was actually quite a bit of community concern when those first big numbers hit the end of the day on Friday. It sort of it startled us. It startled an awful lot of people in the community on Friday and Saturday. I am glad to hear that the responses resonated with you. I think our planning, and particularly the JIC planning, with the OSU public information and community relations folks has really paid off. We have months of planning and experience there. Well, years actually, because it goes back to a lot of prior events. So, you know, I'm happy to hear that it resonated with you. From my perspective, there were very few hiccups in either, you know, information delay or trying to coordinate, and I think that that demonstrates the value of the comprehensive planning and long-term relationship that we do have.
Charlie, would you please also address the funding issue that came up in an email inquiry the other day about the fact that we have a lot of supplemental funds coming in to support this effort? It's not all coming from taxpayer general funds.
Yeah, happy to address that, Commissioner. There was a constituent concern that Commissioner Ogerow received and shared with me that this response, and particularly response to a large number of OSU cases, the burden of the cost of that was falling on the Benton County taxpayers. And I would say from my perspective and my budget, the general fund and taxpayer funding that's coming to support the public health effort has not changed. It is the base funding that we have always received from the budget committee, from the commissioners. We have received substantial additional monetary and in-kind funding from state and federal sources. That is what has allowed us to make, like, the emergency communicable disease hires that came out of CARES Act funding. We're also able to support, and in some cases even backfill, some of the county general fund with some other revenues. So, for example, in communicable disease, we are almost never able to do any, and choose not to do any, billing for communicable disease investigations because it scares people away. We want people with infectious diseases to engage with our team and to get the treatment and preventive care that we can offer, and we absolutely don't want, and I thank the commissioners over many, many years for supporting the idea that any billing to people who are infected with a communicable disease can be a barrier and can force illnesses underground. We are fortunate that there is federal funding to support COVID investigations. So for every case we get, we are able to bill through the state to some federal sources. So we are able to get supplemental funding specifically for communicable disease investigation tied to COVID cases. We've also received extra public health funding for staff, for supplies. There's also been a huge amount of in-kind PPE support to the community, to the health system, to the population at large through federal sources. So really, from my perspective, the base communicable disease and public health funding has not been stretched. We have been able to, in addition, to divert some of our other ongoing public health funding to a small extent, but some extent, into COVID work. And a lot of that is dependent on federal allowances, because most of that is federal state funding. But some of those have allowed some diversion. So from my perspective, there's been very, very little, if any, additional burden on county general fund through this.
Thank you, Charlie.
Great, I appreciate that background on the financials, Charlie. Let's see, is that, do you have anything else for us?
I don't, if there are no more questions.
Okay, well.
I think might be worth having Lilia comment on Commissioner Jaramillo's question about public concerns.
Are you ready, Lilia?
I sure am, yeah. I'll back up a little bit and start with last week. So last week we had not as challenging as the first week during the wildfire emergency, so I was really grateful for that. But we did have the details of a few events change as to when we were actually going to shut down the fairgrounds. So the team did a great job pivoting each time we needed to revise messaging and to re-strategize about how we were going to get something out in a timely manner. I think the other thing that was a really great success of our wildfire efforts as well, we've probably, I don't want to say 100%, but I think that we probably had at least 90% of our content out in English and Spanish. So that was another great success from last week's wildfire emergency. Coming into this week for wildfire, we're primarily looking at assembling content for a summary news release. We have, let's see, we had 181 total animals at the fairgrounds, including 91 horses, 26 pigs, 27 cows, 2 sheep, 20 goats, and 15 rabbits. So we're working on pulling together some of those other statistics from the response, whether or not we can get maybe total number of volunteer hours, maybe number of vehicles that came through the donation site to make donations, or number of pallets worth donations, but really just a summary of how our community came together in response. So we'll wrap that up and get that out hopefully by the end of the week. And then for COVID, the same team has been responding to both wildfire and COVID. So for COVID, last week, probably on Tuesday, we being the Dream Information Center, really started turning our attention back towards the COVID emergency because we kind of had a pulse on the wildfire emergency. We did that in anticipation, knowing that move-in was going to start at the end of the week. I had my bi-weekly OSU communications meeting on Wednesday, so that was a great touch-in with the OSU communications team in advance of the weekend. We were able to put together a brief social media strategy on amplifying their messaging, they being OSU's messaging, over the weekend with move-in. So on, I think, Saturday, we had a couple of media inquiries on Friday, but really Saturday and Sunday we had our most media inquiries. We had a few more yesterday. As Charlie mentioned, the case counts numbers are higher than we've seen in Benton County, so they are causing some attention. Certainly I'm happy to see that the rate is not up at 5%, is much closer to, I think, what Charlie said, 1.8. So I think that's a great statistical number. Certainly, with any increase in testing, we're going to have an increase in positive test results that come out. So we were able to plan some messaging to prepare folks around some of this pre-planning, like Charlie mentioned, having our contact tracers and our CD team at the ready to be able to respond over the weekend and provide support, and really OSU as well, having a very robust quarantine and isolation plan for any students that were coming in. So while there have been concerns expressed, whether it's through interviews with the media or concerns online from members of our community, we're working to engage with folks who are engaging with us and answer their questions and provide information to hopefully build confidence and trust in our response. So I think it's going well so far, and I'm really looking forward actually to Peter Van Werf's presentation later this morning. Any questions?
I don't see any. Like I mentioned, I was at the Fair Board meeting last night, and I don't think it's been mentioned yet, but a lot of 4-H kids volunteered at the fairgrounds and helped, I assume, helped with animals and another kind of volunteer success story. And I heard something about Cowgirl 911. Are you familiar with that?
I am. Yep. We, let's see, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday prior to that, we had a media station from Portland out at the fairgrounds to do a story about Cowgirl 911.
Okay. And a little background, that was, I believe, Katie Schrock's invention in response to the wildfire displacements of animals and trying to be a clearinghouse for people that needed to transport animals out of the evacuation zones, and so matching up people with equipment to move animals with people who needed to move animals, and it sounds like it took off and was very successful. And one day it didn't exist, and the next day it was going full blast. So I think that's a great story of what one person can get started in an emergency.
Absolutely.
But all right, Charlie, if you're still there, I meant to ask you about if the wildfire disruptions have impacted the test turnaround times.
We did have a slowdown this last week or week before in test turnaround times. I'm not sure how to attribute those, whether it may well be that those slowed down courier service to and from the labs, but it also sort of coincided with the some national confusion around changes in testing recommendations from CDC. So I'm thinking we also saw an upswing in test numbers. Okay. And given that the laboratory capacity is fixed, any significant increase in numbers may well lead to slowing down test result turnaround. We'll be watching that turnaround time very closely, as we always have been. The one thing, actually, now that you mention it, there was a significant disruption in testing at the state laboratory, state public health laboratory, due to the wildfire smoke that overwhelmed Portland, it turned out that the building that the state public health lab is in was badly infiltrated by smoke. Their HVAC system did not keep the smoke out, and in fact concentrated smoke. And so for a couple of days, it was dangerous for the state public health lab folks to work there, and they had to suspend their testing operations. So even though they are a relatively small piece of the overall statewide lab capacity, they're a critical piece for some medical testing and some public health testing, and they did suspend operations for almost 3 days completely. So that was a notable disruption until they could get their HVAC system repaired and provide a safe environment for those laboratorians at the state lab.
Okay. Thanks. Annabelle?
Yeah, Charlie, my question is a little bit beyond our scope, but I'm concerned about the reputation of the CDC has gotten in the last few weeks, and I really trust their most of their work. What's it feel like in the public health community with that kind of bombardment against the CDC?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a gigantic concern. I mean, we public health has always lived and breathed our reputation. The be first, be accurate, and although public health is a lot about informing and recommending policy to elected officials like you and policymakers, we try very hard to be based on science and to provide straightforward, honest information, and it is very painful within the public health system to see the sort of whiplash that we've witnessed as recently as yesterday, where it looks like there's direct intervention into either the content or the visibility of specific scientific recommendations. I think at all levels, the public health suffers, the public health reputation and trustworthiness suffers as a result of that.
Thank you, because that's been worrying me a lot, that kind of backlash that comes back against all public health entities, and it's unfortunate. Yeah,
I think we're likely to see not just, as we go on with this, the growing doubts about the value. We're seeing this in Britain right now with the dramatic rebound in cases there and the measures the government has taken, that the general public is highly dubious of the additional public health measures that the British government is trying to implement in response to the case increase. We certainly, we're fortunate around here to still have very strong compliance from what I see and what I hear with public health recommendations. Not so true in other parts of the state and certainly in other parts of the country. I think we're going to face a serious uphill fight and some real challenges when a vaccine becomes available. Probably early next year, maybe a little sooner. But not just with that. I think we're going to see a parallel increase in negative responses to overall vaccination and to other public health recommendations, which is very concerning.
Thank you, Charlie. Matt Weatherall, do you have any Additional comments from your perspective?
No, sir, I do not.
Oh, okay.
I think that everybody has been working extremely hard over the past few weeks, both in the EOC and the DOC. So I'd like to recognize those efforts and to thank Charlie for allowing us to take Shar for him for a little while to help with the wildfire response.
All right, thank you. Anything else on the EOC report? Hearing none, we will transition to the report from the Greenbelt Land Trust, and I think Jessica McDonald is going to lead that report, and we've got some wonderful photographs in our packet. Morning, Jessica.
Thanks so much for inviting me. I see I've got a share screen pop-up that just came up. So I'm going to
There it is.
make sure that this is running before I launch in.
Okay.
All right, great. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, I just want to do a huge shout out to the Emergency Operations Center, Charlie, the whole health department team, especially so inspired by the partnerships and keeping everything together. Know that the community is watching, and I'm sure you hear a lot of different feedback, but very much appreciated. So again, thank you so much for inviting me, for joining you today. I know that the three commissioners here know quite a bit about Greenbelt Land Trust, but I still appreciate the time to be able to present and answer questions and talk about some of the projects that we're working on right now. So as you know, 30 years ago, across kitchen tables and living rooms, our founders started dreaming of what this idea of open spaces, natural areas, working lands, clean rivers, what that might look like in the future. And over 30 years, we have made huge strides towards this vision. And there's so many people in our community that know Greenbelt Land Trust, but they don't actually know our origin story. And hopefully everybody at the county does, but maybe some of you on the call don't. On this screen here, we have Charlie Ross, he's the older gentleman, next to Jerry Davis, who was the Parks Director at Benton County at the time. We actually formed out of Benton County. Charlie Ross, in the 80s, he had already been working on this idea for about 20 years, about what would, this idea of conservation. He'd been traveling the world, really looking at green spaces and ideas in England, Colorado, different places, and he didn't have a home for it though. He didn't know what it would look like. He didn't know it would be a land trust. At the time, he first went in the 80s to the city of Corvallis and petitioned them to create a open space fund. But the city, understandably so, the council eventually turned that down because a lot of the properties that were being envisioned were not necessarily within the urban core, within the city limits. And then Charlie heard about this guy, Jerry Davis. And Charlie took Jerry up to what is now Benton Green Natural Area. At the time, it was private land. And overlooking Mary's Peak and its watersheds, he laid out this vision to Jerry, who was just the right person to hear that. Mm-hmm. And as the story goes, Jerry went back to his staff, brought his staff up for a lunch overlooking on that same hilltop, and laid out this vision. And then over the course of about a year, eventually the county commissioners approved the establishment of what was called the Green Trust Fund. And that was seeded with money donated by the Rosses, Charlie and Elsie, to acquire open spaces throughout the county. The earliest acquisitions of those happened before Greenbelt Land Trust, again, was even formed. And the county proudly holds portions of Benton Green due to that trust fund. And just to back up a second, so a land trust, what are we? And as you can see, there's quite a few land trusts across the country, protected more acres combined than all of the national parks combined. And the biggest difference of a land trust is that we protect land in perpetuity. It's really that perpetuity, the idea of long-term ownership, management, and stewardship for a variety of different purposes. Here in Oregon, we have about 20 different land trusts. Working and collaborating across the state, we have strong team across the Oregon Land Trust. We talk to each other. We talk to somebody from another land trust, I would say, every day. You can see Greenbelt Land Trust sandwiched in the Willamette Valley there in that olive green. And Greenbelt was officially formed in '89. And our conservation plan now extends throughout the Willamette Valley, primarily in Benton, Lynn, Marion, and Polk counties. We're getting close to 4,000 acres protected, and of course those are places you know and love, like Benton Green, but they're also places that you don't get to see, the places that are protected for fish and wildlife habitat. I'll highlight one of those in just a minute. The values of Greenbelt Land Trust are, I would say, the reason I've been here for 11 years at the organization. They permeate everything we do, and I'm really proud that these are the values, and I think this is the reason that we are a successful organization today is because of these values. So first I just wanted to do a quick highlight on a property we know very well because it ties to the county, and again, goes back to Benton Green. This complex between Benton Green, Bald Hill Farm, and Bald Hill Natural Area links city, greenbelt, and county lands, and has nearly 20 miles of trail systems across it. And every single piece of yellow trail that's on Greenbelt Land Trust property is actually a county trail easement held and owned by Benton County. So this really lends itself to this ongoing partnership and collaboration, these deep relationships between the county and Greenbelt and the city of Corvallis. I thought I'd share with you just a couple of the things that we're working on, just a few. This year we took the theme of resilient communities, and right when we launched this theme in February, late February at our annual meeting, was literally a week or two before we all went into isolation and physical distancing. And so just kind of amusing to me as I look back, it's like, wow, that was such a big launch, and we've had so much on the drawing board, and fortunately we've been able to move forward with it in this remote world. So first, just looking at regional leadership. This is our vision. We truly believe at Greenbelt that when other organizations, other partners, whether they're in the conservation sector or outside, when they are doing better, we are all doing better. This really is the core of our sort of leadership pact, which is that a high tide rises all boats. And an example of that is at the confluence. I think just one great example right down the street from all of us here in downtown Corvallis. Greenbelt is at the forefront of this project for about 5 years. We've been steering the ship, bringing partners together. So if you don't know about this, we have 6 different organizations that have conservation overlap in their mission. And we have established a partnership that is being physically manifested in this building, which we will be occupying in the near future. Summer 2022, keep an eye out. And if you don't know where it is, it's between Rob Metz and the toy store downtown. And this is not only about a building, but really about a partnership. How can we all be in a space together? What are the leveraging points to really be down the hall and be able to build community with each other? When Commissioner Ojaro was at Murray River Watershed Council, she was at the formation of the confluence here. And as you'll see, resilience is at the heart of this. Some of the statistics on the side about the sustainable design component. This is truly going to be a site that people from all over the state and the region come to see this building. I'm really proud that we're leading it. Since trails and access have been at the core of Greenbelt Land Trust since day one, with places like Fit and Green and Bald Hill Farm at our heart and soul, it's no wonder that health in the outdoors is a big part of our focus right now. And this is another property that we all have a lot of ties to. Owens Farm, Jackson Fraser area is just over 600 areas and has ownership across Benton County, as you know, City of Corvallis, Greenbelt Land Trust, and the hospital. A portion of this property, the Owens Farm portion, was purchased out of an open space bond measure 20 years ago. And when that bond measure was pitched to the public, it was pitched as this idea of access and trails and open space and a gateway to Corvallis. The trails and access were at the heart of that. And although that was at the heart of it 20 years ago, fast forward to today, and very few people know about it because there are no trails to public access on the Owens Farm portion of the property. And so if you remember, a couple of years ago when the hospital announced plans to expand and build on their portion of their ownership with a little strip on the adjacent to the hospital, we saw this as a great opportunity to open a larger discussion about, realizing this trails vision. There's so much potential in this property. It's near town. It has access to the hospital, cultural resources. It has farming. It has habitat. And one day we'll have trails on the Owens Farm portion as well. And we look at this, we talk about public access, sort of with the idea that public access means it's open to everybody. But I think at Greenbelt Land Trust, our learning journey in the last couple of years is really about what is access? What are the barriers to so many people to be able to enjoy the outdoors? Whether that's transportation challenges, racial discrimination, mobility limitations. And so we've really been, as I said, on this learning journey, not only Greenbelt, but all of our partners. We've been holding community discussions, we've hosted panels, and contracted with professional trail designers, which is where we're at right now, to better understand the barriers that exist and lay out a framework of trail systems. And three faces in here you'll recognize. Fortunate to have our 3 county commissioners on this walk at Owens Farm with us last year. We call this partnership the Owens Farm Partnership. I know it's not maybe the most original name, but collaboration truly is at the core of this effort. We really think about, we're not just building a trail, we are building relationships. And I want to also big shout out to the Benton County Health Department, especially Sarah Harstein, Rocio Munoz, Matt Gillespie. These are people that have been with us since day one and really helping and leading the vision for what healthy communities might look like on this trail system and on this property. And then thirdly, looking at resilient habitats and, my mouse is deciding to do its own thing. Another significant portion of our work at Greenbelt Land Trust, a huge portion of our work really is in habitat protection and management and restoration. Over the last decade, thousands of acres have been entirely transformed, providing refuge for animals and people, clean water, and this is really at the heart of our entire stewardship program. So I think this is a great way to demonstrate that, is to just look at a field. In 2009, this is a property that we hold a conservation easement on, and the marked rows there are laid out, they're laser leveled, and they're tree rows, getting ready for planting. Over the next 2 weeks in this one portion of this field, 50,000 native trees and shrubs would be planted. And then fast forward, this is 3 years later, and we have, year to year, we try to choose a staff member who's about the same height to go stand in front of these trees to try to document them. And so you start to see, the impact. And, well, this video may or may not play, but here's a good drone image taken last fall of similar planting sites just turned the other direction. And so you see these trees, some of which are 30 feet tall, these cottonwoods now. And it's really incredible to be, for this property, for these properties, establishing literally entire floodplain forests, providing critical habitat for salmon, water storage for our communities, cooling our waters. And, you know, this is one of those times when I think back 10 years ago and again to a property like this when I was leading walks with partners like you all out there to say, we can envision in the future, 10 years, what this might look like when we plant 100,000 trees. And, you know, today we're there. It's pretty incredible. And so whether we're leading hikes and outreach events for our community, whether we're building miles of trails with volunteers. This is Mulkey Ridge Trail, again, a trail easement owned by Benton County, between Fitton Green and Bald Hill Farm that had been a missing link in the trail system for 30 years. And finally, we're able to build the trail and purchase that property in 2015. Whether we're protecting wetlands and rivers for wildlife, like this beautiful blue heron here, or preserving family farms. These were landowners at Lone Star Ranch in Tuolumne. Or protecting homes for, I mean, I gotta always include this photo, or one of our amazing photos of our bobcat family at Bald Hill Farm. Or training high schoolers, lead environmental education field days. These are part of our dual immersion program that we host at places along the Willamette River and at Bald Hill Farm. High schoolers have come out of several of our schools in the Corvallis School District, go and they learn how to become the mentors and educators for third graders. It is entirely taught in Spanish, and one of our achievements of that program over the last couple of years is being able to really highlight the opportunity for mentorship and leadership with these high school students. And so we're working to build community. And speaking of community, this is Greenbelt Land Trust. Our talented staff, happy even amidst downpours, are truly on the front lines and are change makers for conservation. And again, one of the biggest reasons that I love coming to work every single day. And I just wanted to, right around 15 minutes or so, have some time for questions and really get down to anything that you might be interested in learning more about. I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Jessica? Well, I'm glad you had a picture of the tour that we were all on at Owen's Farm, I believe, last fall, and I really like the partnerships that were on the tour, the Samaritan folks and Benton County Health Department and Greenbelt and from the achievements so far, it shows we need partnerships to be successful on a lot of these projects and figuring out who potential partners are and how to come out with one vision of moving ahead is a real skill and so.
Yep, the Owen Farm Partnership is one that was very timely. I mean, it's right in front of us every day, but also I think that, you know, it's taken 20 years to get here, and I think that sort of the longevity of these partnerships, the meaningfulness of having deep relationships that have gone beyond different staff members, different commissioners, different people in organizations, and have stood the test of time. You know, when I think back to places like Owen Farm or even to the trail system, what I was talking about, it took 30 years for that one missing link between Bald Hill Farm and Fitton Green to come together. But if we didn't have the county and Greenbelt relationships that we have today, it probably would have taken 60 years, honestly. And so, you know, conservation is not a short-term fix. It's not something that happens overnight. And I think that Owens Farm, Bald Hill Farm, Sitting Green are good examples of that. And it was really great to have 3 of you out there. And also we had, state and federal elected officials and their staff members, and really bringing that message back to policymakers at the state and federal level, and thinking about what access and health in the outdoors means to our communities is really powerful thing that we can put out there in our local community.
Annabelle?
Yeah, and I appreciate all the work that Greenbelt does. As you know, my husband and I personally have a portion of a Greenbelt land trust set aside. And there is some development going on around it, which is a little bit worrisome, but I think having those little nuggets of land around really help to preserve or contribute to the conservancy that is important to all of us in the county.
Yes, thanks, Annabelle.
I would also comment that when budgets get tight, when we end up in those downturns contracting to all of the mandated services, unfortunately, it's our natural areas and parks and this kind of perceived amenity that really loses out. And so I am very, very grateful for the strong relationships we have here locally and in the region through partnerships, because I think it's only because of entities like Greenbelt and your partners that we keep things going, because sometimes our efforts shrink quite a bit. So I very much appreciate the partnership. It keeps our eye on the long-term outcomes and not just on the next biennium outcomes. Right. And with respect to any of these natural areas, we have to be thinking about the long term.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Dan. And I just want to say, the trail systems, the use of trail systems in COVID-19 in this time period, as you might remember back to March and April, Mac Forest, others were stretched so thin they actually ended up closing their trail systems because of overexposure, a lot of people getting out. And we worked with the county and the city to really try to keep the trails open, especially at that Bald Hill Sitting Green complex. What that included is a lot of signage, a lot of media communications, saying how to become better, trail users, and trying to educate people from the ground up. And fortunately, we were able to keep the trails open, and people loved all of us. There's a lot of love coming out of that, definitely.
Well, this is an impressive story and shows what one person with vision and persistence can get going, and then pass it along to future generations, because it is a long-term, seems like all these projects take a long time, and you have to have the vision in place and gradually achieve that vision. I was reminded of the Corvallis to the Sea Trail and the 25 or 30-year effort that is, I think there is a Corvallis to the Sea Trail as we speak, and still a work in progress, but another example of one stubborn person, what they can do, and just here's the vision, and keep plugging away at it, and so you folks and Corvallis to the Sea people and are really an inspirational story to all of us, and a good example of it. Whatever your plans are, it's probably going to take longer than you ever imagined to get it done, but persistence. Well, I don't see.
And here, and here's to, stubborn people with a vision, and taking the lead for so many in our community. And I think I speak of that with the three of you as well. Thank you.
Well, really appreciate the report, Jessica, and I'm looking forward to progress on the Confluence building, and that's another work in progress that's, I think, going to make a big difference in the conservation efforts in our community. So, thank you much. Next up, the folks from Lumina requesting a Benton County scholarship. So Angela Ibbard, I think, is one of the presenters. And I see Angela is with us. Are you taking the lead on this presentation? Or apparently you are.
Yes.
We have pictures.
Can everybody, can you hear me and are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting us today, and I'm apologizing on behalf of Elizabeth French, who was also planning to join us. She was called out of town on personal business, some care needed for her aging mom, and was not able to get back in time to join us for this meeting. So she's very sorry she's not here. But we're here today to talk to you about our 40th anniversary. And before we do that, I just wanted to give you a little context about Lumina and our history and the services that we provide in our community. I caught the tail end of your previous conversation and talking about stubborn people with a vision, and we are definitely the beneficiaries of some stubborn people with a vision 40 years ago. We're so grateful that they had that vision and they had the will and tenacity to start at that time Benton Hospice Service. So our mission, as you may know, is to provide compassionate care and support to patients, families, caregivers, and really the community at large through the end-of-life experience. We've been doing this for 40 years. Benton Hospice Service, now Lumina, was founded in 1980. At that time, as I said, the founders really, this was quite visionary at the time. There were no hospice services in Oregon, one that we're aware of on the West Coast at that time. But Dr. Cleaver and Jean Cleaver and our other founders had a vision. They saw a need in the community for care for those facing end of life, at that time, predominantly cancer patients, a need for care in addition to physical care, emotional, social, spiritual care for them and for their caregivers, and importantly, the ability to live out their life at home at the end of their life, and really to enhance the quality of their life in those days. That was their vision, and they admitted their first patient officially 40 years ago. Today, we remain a community-grown, independent nonprofit. That's something for us to celebrate, but really for our community to celebrate. Many communities do not have a community-based nonprofit hospice anymore, as for-profit hospice and network hospices kind of move into the marketplace. So it's something that our community should be really proud of, and we certainly wouldn't be here today without the support of our community. In those 40 years, we've gone from that first patient back in 1980 to serving over 6,000 patients since then, as well as their families, caregivers, and the community at large. And while, we've grown up and we are no longer an all-volunteer organization as we were in 1980 when we started, we still remain powered by community volunteers. So today we have 60 paid staff, but we have upwards of 125 community volunteers without whom we could not deliver the enhanced care that we provide in the community. Volunteers who serve from providing respite for caregivers who need it, sitting vigil with the actively dying, providing pet care services so that pets can remain at home with a patient at end of life as long as possible, which can be really important to people. Sometimes helping with just needed things like grocery shopping, supporting bereaved. We even have a volunteer who makes memory bears for the bereaved out of clothes from loved ones. Just so many ways that our volunteers are involved and help us to provide this level of care in the community. Last year, we served over 400 hospice and palliative care patients, a little over 50 in our transitions program, and we serve over 1,500 community members annually through our grief and caregiver support services. Those are services like one-on-one counseling, grief support services, caregiver education programs that are provided free to anyone in the community, whether or not you have someone on our service or not. Anyone in the community in need of caregiver support or mourning the loss of a loved one has access to these services. So to celebrate this history, we're hosting an event on November 5th, and it's really an opportunity to outreach to the community, tell a little bit more of our story, to celebrate, and to share some insight about how we impact the lives that we serve. And, first and foremost, we really would like to invite you personally. I think it's important as leaders in the community. We really would love to invite you so that you can gain a little more insight, hopefully leave a little inspired, and maybe a little stronger connection to Lumina. And then we also wanted to invite you to consider supporting the event as a sponsor. We are seeking sponsorships to, of course, underwrite the cost of the event and just help allow us to really outreach to the community through this event. So that was the nature of why we're on the agenda for today, and I just welcome the opportunity to answer questions and sort of have a discussion. Excuse me.
Okay. Do we have any questions for Angela?
I would just say that in this time of great challenge, between COVID and fires and people losing their homes, and just the general stresses that are on all of us as we go through a very testy electoral season, I think that there's a lot of anxiety and grief, and obviously there's increased mortality. So a community entity like Lumina is all the more important at this time. So I will definitely attend the November 5th event. I would propose that we support the event commemorating the 40th anniversary as a sponsor. And I was thinking of a level of maybe $1,000 or $1,500 sponsorship.
Okay, and we remember kind of a brief mention of that we do have some discretionary funds that are available for that.
I'm sorry, Commissioners, this is Lilia Neville. I'm getting a lot of feedback for users who are on the phone. I'm wondering if folks could maybe mute their mic if they weren't speaking. I was unable to follow the conversation.
All right. So
Is that in the form of a motion, Sam?
I would be happy to make that a motion. I would propose that we sponsor the Lumina 40th anniversary event at a level of $1,500 to help them commemorate 4 decades of service and continuing service to the community moving forward.
I would be happy to second that.
all right, it's been moved and seconded to for Benton County to be a sponsor at the $1,500 level. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Motion carries, and appreciate your information, Angela, and tell Elizabeth French we wish her well with her family issues, and looking forward to hearing more about your organization. It's impressive that you have been serving our community for 40 years, and looking forward to the next 40. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and we'll send an email directly to the three of you for a personal invitation to the event, and we welcome having you join us then, and we really appreciate the support that you've just authorized. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, would it be appropriate to take a 5-minute break?
I was going to get through a couple more, but sure. We're slightly ahead of schedule. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and next up is Kate Borsch and Business Oregon grant update. So see you in 5 minutes. Are you ready to report, Kate Borsch?
Yes, I am. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. So I will be brief this morning. I just had a couple of quick updates for you. Wanted to start with the Business Oregon grant program. We talked about this at your meeting last week. As you recall, the consortium that sort of gotten together to make some requests about some changes to these programs was trying to figure out their best path forward. And as you pointed out, Commissioner Malone, with the delay of the legislature getting together, that was no longer going to be the path forward. So the governor's e-board is meeting this Friday, and so that's the path that this group chose. The group put together a really nicely formed letter with signers from all the different cities and counties and associations that feel strongly about this issue, as well as kind of an information sheet that gave a breakdown and some data about our concerns about how few folks have been receiving the funds and why we feel strongly about those changes. As soon as I'm off with you here this morning, I'll forward that letter to you all so you have that information and can review it. I think at this point, I'd like to just let you know the 4 points of the letter, and I think we talked about most of these, but really the problem with these funds has been this next round, this round 3, has a subtraction formula that would, again, let me back it up. Previously, the previous rounds eliminated folks who had received either PPP or EIDL, which we're finding out is many, many people. Round 3 included a subtraction formula, but that subtraction formula, we believe, is still going to eliminate about 90% of the folks that we think really are needing these funds. So one of the recommendations this letter is asking for is removal of that subtraction formula and taking a look at how they're doing it. That's really the biggest. The other items were related to streamlining the administration and timing of these multiple rounds. Our practitioners in the area have really felt like the way this has been rolled out has been confusing for businesses. We feel like it's made it harder to get the funds out, which of course is everyone's goal, right? So we'd like to streamline the application process, streamline the way the funds are rolled out, remove the subtraction formula, and then the final item is to allow some sort of consistent administration or operating percentage fee. They allowed an operational cost for the CDFIs, but they did not allow that same percentage for cities or counties that were trying to operate these funds on their own. So that was the final ask. So again, I'll forward the letter so you can see it. I think my ask of you today is twofold. One, I think if you as commissioners have contacts with the folks that are on the governor's executive committee, and if you feel strongly about this issue, I would ask that you reach out to them and share the concerns that are outlined in this letter. Props to our friends at Community Lending Works and really all the folks that were part of this consortium, but really Emily Ryman at Community Lending Works led pulling the group together, getting the talking points down. And you'll see in her email, we've got not just the letter, but she's really summarized just 4 or 5 key bullet points for folks who do have an interest in talking to legislators about why this is important. So that would be my one ask. My second ask is basically feedback. At this point, again, we continue to be in a sort of holding pattern with Benton County executing their agreement with Business Oregon for the Round 3 funds. They inquired last week, and I said, hey, the commissioners still have some questions, that I would be meeting with you today. I think what I would hope is that we could put them off at least until Friday to see if there is going to be a change to the program. Again, I just have hesitations of you guys entering into a contract with a certain set of stipulations if those are all about to change. So let me pause there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on this topic.
Could you send us who's on the governor's executive committee or
Yes, you bet. I'd be happy to.
And e-board if that's handy?
Yep, I'll do it.
I think that your instinct to not sign the contract until after the e-board decision on Friday makes sense. If they will allow us to delay that long. And I'm sure that we are not the only ones in that boat. So.
Correct, we are not. Yeah, I've reached out to a handful of other communities. Lane County has also not executed that contract. They, of course, have been harder hit with the forest fires, and really their energies, of course, have been elsewhere. But at the same time, they're actually rolling out, kind of like we did here in Benton County, their own loan program here in the interim, but they have a keen interest in seeing the outcome of these conversations with the e-board. Mm-hmm. So we're not the only ones sort of waiting to see the outcome here.
And with respect to round 2 and the fact that there's been slow uptake of the funds because of the eligibility exclusion if you've received PPP or EIDL, when do those funds need to be spent out, and do you expect that there will be demand to do so, or will we need to make a similar request to the state about those also?
Right, and so round 2 closed last week.
Okay.
I'm waiting for the final report from Community Lending Works, but earlier in that week, the last report I had received was that we had only been able to commit about half of those funds. So of the $75,000 that was earmarked for Benton County, about $35,000 had been committed. The rest were not. We had a number of applications who were not eligible, and despite our best efforts to market and really say, hey, you're not going to be eligible if you've received PPP or EIDL, in about 90% of the cases, that was the reason for them being ineligible. So we'll wait for those final numbers, but at this point, that one is closed. It's a bit of an unknown what happens to the remainder of that money. Round 2, of course, was not to Benton County. It was direct to the CDFIs and went to Community Lending Works. But the idea was originally that those funds would go back to Business Oregon. I think another point of discussion, it's not in the letter, but I think what a lot of folks had hoped for is that if Business Oregon is willing to remove some of these restrictions, that they would take any unspent funds and kind of reallocate and allow us one last push to get the funds out the door. We've spent many months working to get the funds out the door and kind of gave, first crack to the folks who had not received PPP or EIDL, and we've really, especially in Benton County, man, we're trying to turn over every stone to find folks, and just those funds are getting used. So we are hopeful any remaining will be reallocated for the same purposes, but that's as yet unknown.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Kate?
Do you have any sense for business trends here locally and how our local businesses are faring?
Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing that up, Commissioner Ojo. That was a perfect segue, actually, to one of the other items that I had for you guys. I believe it was you, Commissioner Ojo, who requested some data on a number of firms closed in our area, which is funny that I think I mentioned the city councilors had that same question that same week. So after a kind of long back and forth with Patrick O'Connor, our rock star economist for the area, he explained to me that sadly we don't have a good data set for the number of firms closed. Really, the data that we have to go off of is the unemployment rate, and we can look at that by sector. The problem with firms closing, and I believe they've tried to do this before, but it was really problematic, is that you may have a firm that is purchased, and so it would show as closed, but maybe it reopens under the same name, when that really wasn't a closure, it was a transfer. And there's a lot of things that make the data look really hinky and actually inflate the numbers to make it look like way more firms are closing than may actually be the case. And so they really don't have a solution for that type of data. And he did say, though, that we can look to the unemployment trends, which, of course, I think you guys all know our hardest hit industries continue to be anything having to do with tourism, hospitality, catering, that sort of thing. So no big changes there, though sadly, I mean, a sad silver lining from the fires, though, is that our Corvallis hotels were full and continue to be doing very well with occupancy of folks that need shelter and are able to afford to stay in a hotel while they figure out the rebuilding of their homes or being able to go back into them.
Thank you.
You bet. And if I may, Commissioner Malone, the last item I had just real quickly was an update on the CDBG. These are the little micro program for businesses. This is going to be for low-income individuals or low-income business owners. Again, really, I think you guys know this, but you've got a real rock star in Rebecca Taylor in your Community Development Department. I got to work closely with her at the EOC. I think just very highly of her. She's continued to kind of lead the way for you folks at the county to kind of check all the boxes. And we know with CDBG there are many, but checking those boxes to get Benton County back in the space where you can accept the funds and get those going. In the meantime, and I think you recall, we're working, the city has its allocations slated for the same program, and do you. So I'm working to kind of do these concurrently. And so the city has executed their contract with HUD and has approval. And so they are in a holding pattern. Again, I feel strongly, and the city folks agree, and Rebecca agrees, that what we want to do is hold back on the city funds until Benton County is ready to roll, and then we're just going to roll it out as one nice big program, county-wide. It'll be seamless for applicants, and it'll just be us and really our friends at Community Lending Works behind the scenes that'll be sorting folks into the different pots of funding, depending on whether they're a county-wide resident or within the city limits. And we think that'll really just avoid confusion and make it easier for our friends in business.
Thank you for that update. I was wondering about the timing on that one.
You bet, you bet. And hard to say in terms of timing. Again, Rebecca's working real closely on this. I've been aiming for mid-October. I think that's still possible, but we're probably going to be in that October timeline. So we'll continue to monitor it and keep you updated with where we're at on that. But that was the bulk of my update for you guys today, and appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate your concise report, Kate, and I know you have a lot going on, and so looking forward to making some progress, and hopefully on the state dollars we can get the rules changed to make the program work as I think people intended.
Indeed. We're hopeful too. And I'll, right after I drop off with you guys, I'll get that letter out. I'll copy Mary and Joe and Teresa and, the usual suspects, and make sure that you've got a list in there as well of the e-board members, should you so choose to reach out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And keep in touch.
Will do. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Next up, Peter Banworth, update on his epidemic projections. Looks like, I think Peter is ready to go and has some updated slides for us. Good morning, Peter.
Hello. Hi. Thank you, commissioners. As usual, I was waiting patiently and did not make sure that my camera had switched to the right camera, but I'm going to switch that now so that you can see me. And we're waiting for that to work. Sorry about that, commissioners. I may have to just move forward without a camera. There we go. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, commissioners, for having me here today. Can you all see the Benton County COVID-19 projections?
Yes.
Yes.
On your screen? Great. This is not the same PowerPoint presentation that you have in your packet. We decided in public health that it would be important to try to provide you with projections and models based on the latest available information. And so I did update projections yesterday based on information on new cases that had come in last week. And of course, if there are questions about the specifics for updating, I'd be happy to answer those at any point. So one of our goals here in presenting to the Board of Commissioners is to try to provide you with ongoing updated information to assist you in contingency planning and also to raise questions that then we have an opportunity to answer. So I think I see Charlie Fountain is also on, and so as questions arise, when they're better directed to him, I might bounce them over to him, but any questions I can answer, I'll be happy to do as well. So it's been a while since I presented to the board on public health models and projections, and I just wanted to do a quick refresher on the nature and the purpose of these models. So models and projections apply mathematical principles to represent complex real-world phenomena. And, you know, a model is always a simplification of reality because we have to reduce reality to something that computers can process, basically. These models and models in general, they're useful for contingency planning and exploring broad brush possibilities. These are not intended to make predictions about certain futures, but to examine different possibilities so that the board has some information when developing contingencies. And I'd like just to say another word about what I mean by a contingency. So in the world of statistics where I come from, we like to be able to put probabilities on everything. You know, there's a 10% probability that it might rain, or there's a 30% probability that, you know, the Lakers are going to win the NBA Finals, for example. Contingencies don't always come with probabilities. So when I'm presenting these models, I'm not saying with some probability that one of these scenarios is more likely than the other. Contingencies are there to say, regardless of what the probability is, these are things we might need to be prepared for. So I really want to emphasize that, and happy to discuss that more if there are additional questions. We will continue updating these projections as we learn more. What we learn for these projections go into the assumptions and the parameters in the model. They don't necessarily mean the model is completely accurate, and it's still not providing accurate predictions necessarily, but they allow us to refine our assumptions and parameters so that our models are more closely aligned with reality. And I also want to note at the beginning, and I'll note this a couple times, is based on the projections that I've done and how I've updated them over time, I've come to determine that the projections from this model are much more sensitive to the response to COVID-19 prevalence than to the actual prevalence at any given time. I've said another way, whether there are 15 cases or 150 cases on a given day, the projections don't change considerably moving over time. Instead, it's the policy and community responses, and the three different scenarios I have to show you today really reflect different policy and community responses. It's those that lead to significant changes in outcomes. So I last shared the updated model with you in early August, and I have updated it since then. So in August, I had refined the model to use different age groups, and those different age groups have different interactions. So they recognize, for example, that people who are 65 years and older may be less likely to interact with people age 18 to 29 compared to 18 to 29-year-olds interacting with other 18 to 29-year-olds. And we also have data showing us different hospitalization rates and different mortality rates for different age groups. One additional update I did is I calibrated the model basically by running a couple different initial conditions and identified the one that matched most closely what we know historically about Benton County data in the past 6 months. So a slight refinement of some of our model conditions there. The other major change I added to the model came based on what we've learned over the past week or so. So I'm assuming that, so let me refresh my memory a little bit. Since August, what have we learned? Well, in conversations with Oregon State University, we have learned that they have on-campus living about 2,000 to 2,300 students they expect are moving onto campus beginning this past Friday and ending today or tomorrow. And additionally, they expected, and this is a very rough estimate, so don't hold OSU to this, but somewhere in the neighborhood of, sorry, that was my phone, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 additional students and or faculty and staff moving into the geographical Benton County community for the start of fall term. So about 12,000 individuals overall. And so that's something that we learned from Oregon State University in the past month or so. And in the model, I assume that most of them are age 18 to 29, representing largely students, but some are age 30 to 64, which may represent older students, faculty, and staff. So over the past weekend, we learned that with on-campus move-in, there were a large number of identified COVID-19 cases among those on-campus move-ins. It's not, in my estimation, a bad thing that we identified those cases because those are all cases that we can do something about. Based on the data available to me yesterday, it was approximately 1.5% of the on-campus move-ins had a diagnosed COVID-19 infection based on their rapid antigen testing. That percentage has since come down to 1.4%, and when on-campus move-in is finished, we are coordinating with OSU Student Health Services to get a final prevalence, a final percentage. So I made the extension that if we assume that 1.5%, whoops, I'm sorry about that. If we assume that 1.5% of people moving to Corvallis to begin enrollment at OSU in the fall have an infection, well, then 1.5% of those 12,000 individuals would have an active infection, which is 180 individuals. This is only a very rough estimate based on preliminary data. We don't know about all of these infections. In fact, we did identify, I would say OSU is very confident, that we identified nearly all, if not all, infections among move-in students, but that doesn't mean we've identified infections among students who moved to off-campus locations. And therefore, in this model, I made the assumption that 180 of these individuals have an active, undetected COVID-19 infection. It's not only among students, it's also 1.5% of this age 30 to 64. And again, this is just an assumption to get the model running. So the main difference in this from the previous projection is the previous projection assumed 15 individuals had an active undetected COVID-19 infection. So that's an increase of over 10 times based on the previous best information that we had in August. So with those changes, this one here is the most significant. I ran the model again, produced the simulations, and again, 3 different scenarios that that represent the baseline scenario in which we have the same policies and interventions that we have had available to us, for example, in the spring, to respond to increases in infections. The no policy scenarios in which we don't have those tools available to us, and the public health champion scenario in which additional efforts can reduce the spread of the disease. And the model, as before, produces a whole bunch of different data: infections, policy intervention intensity, daily hospitalizations, and cumulative deaths. Are there any questions so far from the commissioners?
Not at this time.
Okay. If I've introduced more confusion, then please jump in. So before I move on to the next slide, I want to give just a quick summary of what I observed. The first is there are more infections. There is greater epidemic pressure when the number of introduced infections increases from 115 to 180. The second is that there are not significantly more hospitalizations or deaths, even with more than 10 times the number of additional infections. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is most of those infections are among very young, very generally healthy people who are mostly interacting with other young and healthy people. And so their hospitalization and mortality rates are very low. And the second reason for that is based on the ability to reduce that epidemic pressure in the baseline scenario and the public health champion scenario. Even a shock to the system, if you will, of 180 additional cases can still be controlled and moderated and brought down in a reasonable amount of time to prevent the epidemic from spreading without restraint. So moving on, so we can see here in our baseline scenario looking at infections in Benton County, there is, right here where I'm showing you is that kind of spike from the introduced cases that we're assuming for this model. That does lead to growth in cases, but policy responses, individual efforts, et cetera, to reduce the epidemic pressure will bring those cases down. We see a second peak here in February and March, primarily because under the assumptions of this model, once cases get low enough, those interventions are relaxed, and yet there's still a number of cases in their community which leads to kind of a second spike. So what I would say, the takeaway from here is interventions work in turning around the epidemic, but losing vigilance as winter progresses is not a good idea. The hospitalization rate, I'll try to jog your memories thinking back to over a month ago now. The hospitalization rate looks almost identical to this. There are a little bit higher spikes here when the cases spiked, but again, most of those cases, according to the model, are coming among younger and healthier people. And so the hospitalization rate still only gets up to 3 or 4 in the winter. And the death rate, while excess deaths from COVID-19 is never something that we're going to be okay with, it shows that even with that stronger shock to the system, there's still an estimate of about 30 cumulative deaths by the end of next summer, which is consistent with the previous estimates from the previous projections from August. So moving on to the no policy scenario. Again, this is the one where there are no tools to reduce that epidemic pressure, and basically the natural reproductive number for COVID-19 is allowed to act on our community. There's that shock to our system right there, which pales in comparison to the internal epidemic growth. So comparing this to the model where there were only 15 introduced cases, the only difference is that the peak comes about a month or 3 weeks earlier. It's really not the number of introduced cases that cause this spike, it's the lack of response that causes this spike. As before, there's a huge burden on our hospital system. If we do reach these sorts of infection rates, the infection will spread throughout our whole community without stepping in, and then therefore we do see the more vulnerable and the more medically fragile having higher rates of COVID-19, leading to hospitalizations and leading to as many as 220 or so additional deaths by the end of next summer. And the public health champion scenario, again, this scenario makes the assumption that we are 4 times as effective at identifying COVID-19 cases through contact tracing, through people having access to testing and getting tested. Also, people, you know, if they feel like they may be ill, you know, self-quarantine, going and seeing their doctor, having the ability to do that because of childcare or, you know, leave policies, et cetera. It's not a simple way to get to this scenario, but if we can, and we are 4 times as effective at identifying cases, that initial shock to the system is basically removed immediately. Again, in this scenario, it does require some pretty strong interventions. I will say that unlike in the August projections where basically the epidemic could be controlled without additional interventions, the assumptions in this model update require some sort of, you know, policy intervention, as I've been phrasing it, to really reduce the epidemic pressure. Nevertheless, it has a really strong effect, and after bringing that shock of cases down and preventing epidemic spread throughout the rest of the winter and the coming year, you know, people are able, or our community is able to manage the epidemic without additional interventions. The hospitalization rate is projected to stay fairly low, and the projected number of deaths is projected to be about 20. So I'd like to just put up the scenario summaries page. And, you know, I think I've mentioned most of this information, so I'd like to open it up for any questions, and I can move back and forth between slides if there are any questions about the slides. Thank you.
I've got a question on the OSU situation where they're working hard at testing people that are moving into the dorms. Is there any comparable program for testing off-campus students? I mean, I'm thinking some of those students would be physically going to class or trying to do an educational program of coming to the MU on Tuesday afternoon and get tested, or and that may be a question for Charlie, but wondering about so working real hard at the 2,000 to 2,300 students. What about the other 9,500?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Malone. Yes, Charlie has been in real close communication with OSU, so I'm going to pass this over to him.
Okay.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Commissioner. Yeah, this is exactly what OSU Trace is going to do on a weekly basis. So every person at OSU who has an OSU email account, an Own It account, will, and that's faculty, staff, and students, whether they live on campus or live anywhere, if they are enrolled, and additionally, this is across both our campus, the Cascades campus, and the Newport campus. They'll be doing this in all 3 locations. So everybody with an Own It account will be invited to enroll in a random testing program. And this is what OSU Trace will be. So every week, 1,000 of those people at this campus in Corvallis, 1,000 students, faculty, and staff will be invited to come to, and they'll be selected randomly out of everyone who's enrolled. They'll be invited to come to campus and be tested. So if you were a student, you're a faculty or staff member, you may get picked 2 weeks in a row and then not picked again for 2 or 3 weeks after that. You may never get picked, but they will be doing this every week. So there will be ongoing surveillance, not just on campus, but of everyone involved with OSU. Additionally, they're also doing wastewater monitoring on an ongoing basis. So they're tapping into the sewer system, as we've all learned somewhat disgustingly. You do pass the viral RNA through fecal waste, and it is possible, not just with this disease, but with many others and some toxins and things like that, to test wastewater. And so they will be doing this on campus, and it sort of helps validate the findings that, and Peter's on the advisory group for all of this testing and has worked very closely with OSU on planning these tests, and we'll be getting the data back from them on a real-time basis. But what it does is, looking at the RNA in the wastewater, we can more or less validate the nasal random testing each week and see, geez, if they're not showing much on the nasal testing, but there's a spike in the wastewater testing, what they can actually do is move their testing upstream and try to isolate, a single building or a single residence hall or wherever those signals of RNA are coming from. And then the hope is that then there will be permission from OSU administration after that to do individual testing within that target area to identify the people that are shedding that specific virus that was found in the wastewater, but which may not have shown up as a large signal on the random testing. So there's a pretty robust program of that.
Charlie, for me, that raises another question in terms of comparison with urban populations and rural populations where we don't have the same wastewater disposal systems.
Yeah, good question, Commissioner. We don't have the same access to tools, and to this point, OSU Trace, and again, this coming weekend, OSU will be doing community trace with it in Corvallis, and again, that's just in Corvallis city limits, with randomly selected households. And to this point, both the private and state funding that's gone to that have been to larger municipalities. We just unfortunately have not had the same attention to rural areas and you know, there's density, there's complexities, there's travel, there's other complications there. On the other hand, people who are living in less crowded conditions, you know, even within Corvallis, people living in single-family households instead of in residence halls are at lower risk. There's better opportunities for sort of cohorting and nesting and isolating within your own bubble and preventing disease that way, preventing spread.
I have a question. I wanted to get a better sense for the baseline scenario and the public health champion scenario, partly because I'm assuming that in Benton County, we're not likely to end up in the no policy zone. And I don't see the governor abandoning all of the efforts that have been set up. It's good to see what might happen but the baseline scenario, what bothers me about that is that the double spikes and the, as you say, periods of, what was it? That we would have to intervene in order to keep knocking it down. And if we have to intervene more actively than what we're doing already and go more towards more shutdowns or closing restaurants or whatever, that's going to have a stronger economic effect and an effect on everyone in the community. So what is it that we need to do based on these this scenario exploration in order to ensure that we don't have that spiky pattern and that we can have as stable a pattern of a COVID exposure as possible in order to keep our schools, get our schools open, keep businesses open, keep providing services? That's my question. And I'm not completely sure, based on how you've described the public health champion scenario, what it is that we might need to invest in order to get to that outcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I can speak, and I'll speak about the model, and I think it can be extrapolated to think about, actual real-world responses. So the model works by reducing the affected reproductive number primarily. So I have referred to these as policy interventions, but really what they are reducing that reproductive number from an average of about 2.5, which is the R naught of 2.5 is a numerical number that's described as used to describe kind of how the coronavirus spreads without in its natural course. The model works by reducing that 2.5 down to something closer to 1 or even below 1. When that reproductive number is below 1, that means that any person is expected to infect less than one additional person, and therefore you see a decrease in cases. So speaking in terms of the baseline model, there aren't specific policy interventions that are used. So getting to the Commissioner's point, the goal is not necessarily to use policies or interventions. The goal is to reduce that epidemic pressure.
Right.
So how can we do that without the sorts of policy interventions we saw in March, April, and May is a really good question. That's one big way of reducing the epidemic pressure is by, so we know that face coverings work to reduce that. You're less likely to infect. We know that actual physical distancing helps in spacing people out. There are things that aren't, stay-at-home orders that do reduce that epidemic pressure. I think that the science is still out on exactly what's most effective, how effective that is, what combinations, et cetera, but I'm putting it on my list of things to research so that within public health and as we update the board, we can hopefully give some more concrete examples of ways to reduce epidemic pressure. The other thing I wanted to mention, and this is really where the public health champion scenario gets its punch, it's not so much about reducing that reproductive number, it's about finding cases.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if an unknown infected person is going to infect 2.5 other people, because if you can identify that case early and get them safely into isolation, they're not going to infect anyone.
Right.
And that's really how the public health champion scenario is so effective. It's not about reducing that natural reproductive number, it's about reducing the number of infected people that we don't know about. And so that comes through enhanced contact tracing, effective case investigations, people cooperating with that, so they need to feel safe to cooperate with public health to do so, and people having access to testing so that they can identify, their medical professionals can alert the public health department. There's a whole chain of pieces of that, and I would like to pass it over to Charlie because I think he could shed a little bit more light on both of those.
That's what I was really trying to get to, is that piece, because I feel like that's what we have control over most.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And I think Commissioner Ojero, the final comments, Peter, there, and the maintaining the effort, maintaining the staffing, maintaining the capacity through what promises to be a long duration of this pandemic gets back to the conversations we had earlier this morning during the briefing. I would like to the first point about community effort and reducing the reproductive number. I just want to actually quote something that I received from a comment I received from Senator Gelser just a couple of days ago when we were discussing this. And she wrote to me and said that while people may arrive in Corvallis with infection, we are where we are, and once they're here, it's not just the student behavior, but the behavior of everyone in the community, especially in public places like retail, grocery stores, churches, bars, and restaurants, that will determine how big a surge in infection we get. It's uncomfortable, perhaps, to talk openly about these things. However, it could also make a big difference in terms of infections, deaths, and closures. Yep. I hope that the people in the community recognize it's time for increased vigilance and they act thusly. And so I think there's the two sides to that. It's maintaining our effort, but trying to overcome the sort of precaution fatigue that Peter noted in the presentation, and honestly, back to our briefing this morning, this is what Great Britain is experiencing right now. They had a significant surge in the spring, got it well under control, population relaxed, and now they're having to go back into government-imposed restrictions. They are even imposing fines on people for breaking isolation and quarantine, 1,300 pounds. France has been detaining people because they're having a resurgence. I think it's human nature to relax and say, "Whoa, we've got that behind us. Now we don't have to worry about that anymore." But this is a virus, and it will continue to look for opportunities.
Well, I appreciate this information and showing that we can have a great effect on the outcome if we behave ourselves, and with the we've been through spring and summer, and now it's officially fall and winter, and those are when people tend to, in normal years, there tends to be more illness, colds and flu. Maybe a follow-up question. Seems like this is probably from Charlie, but talking about results from the southern hemisphere as far as flu season and what you've presented so far is it was a relatively light flu season. Is that still the information that we're getting?
Muted myself again, sorry. It's actually a little variable, country by country. In general, it looks like the countries that have had better adherence to public health recommendations for masking and self-isolation and hygiene have had a much dramatically lighter influenza season, in some cases historically light. So these respiratory precautions appear to work for a variety, and we've known this all the time. They work for a variety of respiratory viruses, not just COVID. Other places where there's been less adherence or where governments have given mixed messages or been opposed to public health measures are having both bad flu and bad COVID. But there are examples of much lighter hospitalization, death, and illness from the flu in places where there has been strong COVID measures.
I'd like to return to the communicable disease, the finding cases component just one more time. Looking at the state numbers, the watch list numbers, this last week we got to 95% on the actually contacting people within 24 hours after a positive result, and that's good. We had been, a little low on that metric, but the one that still really bothers me is that we're still only able to trace about, what was it, like 53% of our cases to a known source. So is there anything that we can do to improve that? And do we need more resources in order to be able to find those cases? Or I know we're putting as much investment as we possibly can into the community effort and the education and combating fatigue, but just that cost benefit in terms of where we invest our effort that I'm trying to get at, and what is there something more we can do?
Good question, Commissioner. So that metric specifically, it's not that we're not finding the cases. We are investigating cases. What we cannot do is trace them to a known outbreak or a specific location or a person. So
I understand that.
We still have sort of general cases coming up, and this move-in testing is something OSU is helping us, and I'm pretty confident we're going to see really high rates of being able to contact and intervene on every single one of these OSU move-in cases immediately. But again, they've come from somewhere else. They've come from their households. They've come from all over. And so we can look at that number potentially being worse next week just because we have people, sort of coming from all over the place. I also think statewide that metric, I'm just guessing here, but I'm thinking that metric is going to continue to be problematic and perhaps significantly worse with the movement and the displacement we've just seen. That it'll be much, much, much more challenging to trace a particular case back to a particular location or another particular case when people are moving around. I'm not sure. So on one side, we're blessed because we don't have sort of massive specific outbreaks like our neighbors in Lincoln County saw at the fish processing plants, where you could trace almost all their cases to a specific outbreak or specific location. So it's sort of a good thing that way, but it does, I think it's an indicator more than anything that we still have wild virus circulating in the community. It's a reminder that in that case, these individual precautions are really paramount.
Charlie, Joe Kirby, additional follow-up. Commissioner Ogerow had asked if additional resources were needed in order to improve the likelihood of being able to make those connections relative to contact tracing. Can you please respond to that?
Yeah, apologies, Joe, for not addressing that. I am not sure at this point that additional people or additional resources would crack that particular nut. It's not so much a matter of not having the ability to trace back as the fact that if someone is moving around and they're going to 5 or 6 different places and they're very active in the community, knowing where their highest risk was or knowing where they got infected is incredibly challenging, no matter how many times you interview them or no matter how many interviewers you have.
Yeah.
I think that's a greater factor in it, is that people just have multiple opportunities for infection, and so it's just, it's sort of a law of diminishing. The more times you interview someone, the more frustrated they get, and the more they tell their neighbors, and the less their neighbors may be willing to cooperate in an investigation. You can only get a certain amount of information out, but if people have been out to eat 5 or 6 times and have gone to their faith community and have 2 book groups and 3 different groups that they exercise with, knowing where they got infected is just incredibly challenging and virtually impossible.
All right. Well, I really appreciate this information and your efforts, Peter and Charlie. When you talked about the flu season in the southern hemisphere, and once again, if we behave ourselves, we can have less COVID and less flu and just get through the fall and winter in relatively good shape. And I guess once again, depending on our communications folks to get this information out to the general public, that it's up to all of us to do the right thing, and that especially as long as winter's coming, we can't relax or think that things are going good, because obviously that can change in a heartbeat. But having these scenarios is, I think, really helpful, and we will try to make the best use of them that we can. So appreciate your efforts. Any last questions or comments?
No, I'd like to thank Peter and Charlie for presentation. It's definitely helpful.
Ditto.
All right.
You're very welcome, commissioners.
All right. Get back to work, you two. Thank you. Okay. Changing topics here. 6.1, discussion and decision to adopt amended bylaws for the Solid Waste Advisory Council and Disposal Site Advisory Committee. Daniel Reddick, I saw him earlier. Are you ready?
There he is.
Morning, Daniel.
morning, Commissioners. Since we last spoke on this topic, there have been updates specifically to the use of the word citizen in the documents, so that has been updated per your recommendations.
Great.
And no other changes, so it's basically good to go. If there have been no other changes, and it's just that one change that we were asking for before, I would move that we adopt the amended bylaws for the Solid Waste Advisory Council and the Disposal Site Advisory Committee.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Motion carries. That was too quick.
Commissioner Malone, if we can just pause for just a moment, I do need to get in touch with Nick Kurth. I miscalculated by probably about 5 minutes.
Okay.
And so he is not currently on the line that I am aware of, so bear with me for just a
He's
moment.
popping up.
I am on.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Get my
Okay.
camera on here.
Next up, 6.2, discussion and decision to appoint Criminal Justice System Improvement Technical Advisory Committee members. Take it away, Nick.
All right, hello, Commissioners. Hopefully in your packet you have the spreadsheet that I prepared for this discussion. Is that correct? Otherwise, I could potentially share my screen.
Would you share your screen?
That might be quicker.
Yeah, trying to find it in the packet is.
It's the last item in the package, so it's the last page.
Last page?
Okay, gotta get on the right.
74 of 74.
I don't have the packet up.
Okay. Let me get let's see. Do you have visibility to it yet?
Yes.
It's coming.
Or-
Yep, it's coming.
Right there?
It was there, now it's gone. There, it's coming back.
There you go.
Okay. Okay, great. So this is the list of candidates that I am proposing for confirmation to the Criminal Justice Systems Improvement Project Technical Advisory Committee. As you know, I've been working on this list of candidates for a couple of months. This list has not changed appreciably since I shared it with you at goal setting earlier this month, but the notable change is that line 13, the at-large candidate, I have reduced it from 3 candidates and am recommending 1, which is Rich Hine, who is the governor's citizen representative on WCJC. This particular at-large candidate was to have a strong skill set in business and finance, entrepreneurship. Identified 3 candidates, Trudy Oberland, Nick Fowler, and Rich Hine. I spoke with Rich as the last candidate, knowing that he does serve in many capacities, but around the county and city, but he expressed strong interest in serving, and he has a history dating back to the steering committee meeting for the assessment, as well as currently serving on the WCJC. And so I felt that he is, eminently prepared and willing, and probably the most qualified candidate in this position.
Additionally, there are two members that or two candidates that I have listed simply as member on lines 7 and 8. The individuals have been identified, but there are transitionary issues relative to our own finance department. We know that Mary Otley is retiring near the end of the year, so there'll be a transition there. I didn't want to put just a single name, as that will transition from Mary to somebody else. As well, from the City of Corrales Community Development Department, they identified both Jared Boyce and Jay Yike as potentially tag teaming that position, which is certainly appropriate, but given resource constraints, they didn't want to identify just a single member. And so I had that conversation with Paul Bellata, and that works just fine if it works fine for you. Then finally, on item 10, there is a remaining at-large candidate that I am working to identify. This is a particularly high skill set individual. We're looking for somebody who has a good, strong understanding of equity and diversity and matters of bias, and as they relate to both facilities and programs related to the criminal justice system. It's very important to me to find the right candidate for this position. I didn't want to hold up in paneling the entire TAC, and feel that we can get started hopefully with that person in place, but at least moving forward with impaneling the candidates as shown. So let me pause there and ask if there are any questions.
Nick, I was just looking down the list, and I was looking at that number 10 spot where you have looking for an at-large member candidate. I'm wondering, with the Office of Equity and Inclusion at the university, if there might be somebody from that location where that would fit that role.
Because we've been talking to them.
Have you? Okay.
Yeah, that is one of the possibilities, and in addition to that, so this afternoon, for instance, I'm going to speak with the 11th candidate, which is Professor Brett Burkhart. I have a couple of candidate names that from OSU that I'd like to share with him, just to hear his insights and where he thinks there's good synergy and fit, where there might be duplication. So that's I'm treading carefully and being very thoughtful, kind of, and methodical in moving forward with finding the right candidate. Additional questions?
There was one misspelling for the DA's office of Amy Matusko's last name. It's Matusko.
Matusko, yeah.
Oh, my apology. I thought I fixed that once, and I know I fixed it once, but obviously I haven't here, so I'll make that correction.
Some of those things just slip.
Once you've seen them a few times, yes. Yes. A final point that I want to make, both candidates Cordier and Sarna have previously requested to serve on the TAC. I advise both that we're looking at candidates very much from a skill set standpoint, relative to being able to advise the pre-design phase, essentially subject matter experts or strong previous participation. So I believe this is the right list of candidates, but I did want to acknowledge their interest. I'm not sure if either is on the phone today, but I have also shared with both that We will be standing up the CAC, the Community Advisory Committee. There's opportunity for them to serve there, as well as anyone else from the community, and that the CAC will be helping provide input to the TAC as we move forward.
That makes sense, Nick. Yeah, it does. And we'll also want to inclusion on the Community Advisory Committee members from communities of color.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Any other questions for Nick?
Well, I think we ought to move ahead. I don't have the packet from me. Is there a motion to that effect?
Did you have any other information for us, Nick, before we make a motion?
I do not. Please proceed at your will.
Okay.
I would move that we appoint the Technical Advisory Committee members for the Criminal Justice Systems Improvement Project as listed in the packet provided by Nick Kurth.
I will second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries. Well, appreciate your work on this, Nick. I know it's, especially when you're trying to fill a specific slot, it gets a little tricky, but maybe when you get around to the CAC, it'll be a little easier, but looks like.
Well, I would. Thank you. Sorry, Commissioner Malone. I didn't mean to cut you off there. I just wanted to say I was very thankful for the interest from all of the candidates, and it's really a tribute to our community that there are people willing to serve. And I didn't understate that, at times this would be a bit of a heavy lift, and yet people were still willing to step up. So I appreciate all of your support, as well as the support from the community.
Okay. Well, thank you. And
thank you.
We'll be looking forward to reports on how this is shaping up. Do you have a timetable for your first meeting with the TAC?
I do, in fact. Let's see. Just give me 1 second here to open up a document. And maybe it's not worth the time, but I think we're looking at having a TAC meeting. Looks like the first one probably late or in early October. I think that's kind of what we're looking at. So not too far down the road. And I'll be reaching out to all of the candidates to advise them and confirm their appointment.
Great. Well, thank you for the report. And I don't see any other questions, so you can get back to work.
All right. Okay. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Joe. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Next up is reports from commissioners and Joe. Do you have anything for us?
Yeah, I have one comment, and we recently got a list from Johnavy regarding our legislative breakfast participant list, and I didn't realize it had grown this long, but I noticed that some of the contacts that we've listed in there are really a person and then a staff person with that, and so how we list that might make a difference in the invites. And I know she tries to get a hold of everybody on this list, but we might be able to help her with that paring down.
I think she was aware of the fact that there are a lot of staff people on the list, and the last time she spoke to us about it, she noted those.
Yeah, she did. My question is do we need, I think we may need to have a further discussion on this list and team in terms of the strategies we want to use during legislative session and all that. And so I would suggest that we may want to take that up at a work session.
Yeah, I think what we had decided at the last session was that we would all go through it and prune it ourselves, and then,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then staff would bring back a shortened list, and then we could go from there and discuss it further as needed.
Okay.
And just been in contact with Genevieve this morning, and she tried to get something set up for the first Saturday in October, which is the 3rd, and Senator Gelser looks like she has a conflict, so it's back to the drawing board. But I think the theme is it's going to be Saturday morning, and that was from Representative Rayfield. That
Right.
Anything during the week, 20% of the time gets canceled, and so we want to make sure our local representatives can have the best chance of being at the meeting and letting us know what's going on and what we can do. So, but that list is a work in progress, and
Right.
you can,
So do we need to have?
you can go over that with Genevieve if you have
Yeah,
some
okay.
additions or deletions, or.
Yeah.
But she is working on that.
Commissioner Malone, just to clarify, the legislative breakfast that was tentatively scheduled for October 3rd, considering that Senator Gelser is not able to attend, are we still planning on hosting it, or we're not hosting it at all?
Not on the 3rd.
Okay.
Genevieve is hopefully, as we speak, working on the next Saturday or the following Saturday to make sure that both Senator Gelser and Representative Rayfield can be in attendance.
Thank you.
That was late-breaking news. Sarah was a little iffy and could do part of it, and then sounded like, well, maybe she can't do any of it. So my thinking was sooner the better, and so that's why I picked on the 3rd, and now we're going to be at least to the second Saturday on the 10th. But anything else, Annabelle?
No, I just want, because when I started going through this and saw that duplication, I can understand her frustration with that. I'll take another shot at it.
Okay. And Zan, did you have anything for us?
I do not have any updates.
Okay. I've got a couple, and I forgot earlier when we had better attendance, but Commissioner Nyquist yesterday really thanked Benton County for opening up the fairgrounds for the fire evacuees. The Lynn County facility was full and people were coming in, and I think fairly seamlessly we opened up our fairgrounds and for people and animals, and one of those, we have a slow-moving emergency in the COVID-19, and we had a very fast-moving emergency with the wildfires, and there's a lot of people to thank, but Commissioner Nyquist really was a very heartfelt thank you for Benton County pitching in, and had good timing as they were full to have options for people that had to evacuate. But I did get this concerns the workforce board, and I did get a letter week and a half ago now, about another resignation in that office that needs to be looked into. There seems to be a pattern, and I've been in contact with Commissioner Hunt, who's the chair of the five-county consortium governing board, and there's a process being developed to look into why another staff member has resigned. It's about a four-member office, so the turnover is, I think, is unacceptable. But we shall see what the investigation turns up. So stay tuned.
I had one thing to add before we move off, so I'll remember it. In terms of the transportation issues around the Cascade West Act, things are moving a little bit slower right now in terms of all the other types of emergencies that have occurred. So I think we'll be getting down to, maybe in a month or two, getting down to an agenda again that makes sense, considering all the balls that are in play right now. But the projects that have been funded are moving forward, so that's good.
And the meeting for this month has been canceled?
I believe we were, for September, yes, I believe it has.
Okay. So it'll be...
But I will check on that for sure. But I think October would be the next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe, do you have anything?
Commissioner, I do not.
Okay. I think... I've talked about the state revenue forecast, and the next one is coming out tomorrow.
Yeah.
So hopefully it won't be too exciting. And then the next one is towards the middle of November. So I'm not sure if this is the normal schedule or they picked up the pace because of all the changes that we're having to deal with. But so stay tuned on that. And I think not seeing anything else.
I guess the only last thing I would like to acknowledge, and I should have said this during the announcements first thing this morning, is that I wanted to recognize Commissioner Jaramillo, who's going to be receiving an award tonight at the annual gala for the Democratic Party of Oregon, and receiving the Wayne Morse Award, acknowledging her long service in public office and her commitment to the Democratic cause. So congratulations.
I'm not sure I can do the roar of the tiger, which was the name of the award originally, but I thank you. Thank you. It's really a great honor.
Well, you have a few hours to practice. So.
I've already taped it.
Excellent.
I've already taped it. Yeah, it's a virtual event. So.
Yes. Virtual galas just are
virtual
not the
gala.
same thing. I
So
have to say, I went to one last
of
weekend and
next
it was
to
a real good.
Okay, I think on that note, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.